Vertical disciplining. This is a concept, again from my father, Miloš Ranković, a really useful concept. Vertical disciplining. Why then bureaucratize the spirit? Why exercise tact in order to help an individual perform a consistent character? And why engage in a strategic forgetting of the human being in order to place sovereignty of self in the hands of the social agent? Although the social agent is relatively simple and homogeneous in its capacity as a character, compared with the complexity of the human being and its capacity as a machine of character potential, the social agent is a vitally important character. As we saw in the case of Joanna, the character playing robot, without the social agent, there can be no society of any kind, whether human or machine. Daniel Dennett understands the social agent, what he calls the self, to have evolved for its function as a user interface for other humans. Just as the field of human-computer interaction covers the ways in which computers can be engineered to more seamlessly accommodate humans interacting with them, enabling more intuitive ways of manipulating the computer as a tool, so too have evolutionary processes favored the emergence of the social agent as a tool for human-to-human interaction. By streamlining behavior into a single character, the variety of behaviors exhibited by the social agent becomes relatively predictable, and because of this, the human being becomes relatively operable by others within the social milieu. This essential need to use and be used by others in order to distribute labor in ways that enable the survival of our species is why, even if the character one displays must vary, it is vital to keep it consistent for each social group through, again, what Goffman called audience segregation, so that to each audience and for all intents and purposes, one is still predictable enough to be interacted with by the relevant agents. For Dennett, of special importance is the fact that the social agent allows the human being to enter the social milieu as a stakeholder and responsible agent, even in a complex world in which the source of responsibility, where the cause of an act or event originated, is in fact impossible to trace precisely. The computation required to trace the chain of causation for a single action down to a choreography of atoms, for example, the act of throwing a ball, is intractably large. So, if I'd suddenly decided to throw a ball, we could ask what caused my decision to throw that ball. And to trace the chain of causation, you'd have to go back through my recent past, but then through my entire childhood and through my biology and through every atom that caused that movement. So that in a way, you could see that the computation required to trace the chain of causation that led me to throw the ball today at this time is intractably large. So it's hard to say who was responsible for this ball being thrown. How far back do we need to trace the chain of causation to see what really caused or instigated that decision? Computing how an action comes about is intractably large if we're going to go down to the atom and down through all of the universe's history. So then it would say that the social agent acts as a notation, a shorthand, a currency, or an abstract representation of that staggering distributed calculation. When I say I threw a ball, there is much that has been economized by that I. The word I, the concept I, stands in for this staggering calculation that needed to take place for the ball to be thrown. The social agent claims this intractable chain of causation as its own by standing in for where the buck stops for responsibility. This is what Dennett calls taking the intentional stance, a stance or way of looking at a system which allows us to compress the staggering amount of computation involved in producing an action like throwing a ball into an economical way of capturing causality. Indeed, one possible definition of agent could be that which captures causality at a higher level of abstraction, that thing that represents what caused something to happen. We adopt the intentional stance when we say that a bacterium wants to move towards the sugar molecules, or when we begin to see gliders gliding in the game of life. Agents do and want, insofar as these verbs capture deeper layers of incalculable causation that do not actually stop at the level of the agent. The social agent compresses the intractable chain of causation behind social phenomena, endowing the human being with social responsibility and agency. While the human being may in principle be able to run different characters, in the practical everyday of the social milieu, it pays off for the individual to streamline their range of character and act as if the human being were equivalent to the social agent. It is as if simplification at the individual level aided the emergence of complexity at the communal level. Through the bureaucratization of spirit, through the neat categorizing of self into social filing cabinets of character, the individual may be tempered into becoming a predictable cog that contributes to the expressive range of a larger communal being. Miloš Ranković's concept of vertical or top-down disciplining refers to this disturbing trade-off between complexity at different levels. Vertical disciplining occurs when the inevitably violent flattening of a system at one level enables systems at other levels of organization to flourish in their diversity. Without vertical disciplining, these would-be other levels of complexity are stymied, also a kind of violence. Whoever has the power to intervene in vertical disciplining also has the power to choose their preferred level of complexity. And here's an example of what he's talking about. It's an example he often uses when he talks to me about this. Think about the motorways crisscrossing all over the UK. Each laying of tarmac, ton by ton of it across the land, violently erases the biodiversity beneath it, replacing it with the austere and utterly passionless grey face of unending homogeneity. And yet, zooming out and looking at the same phenomenon at another level of organization, these motorways become the veins and arteries of culture, lubricating social mobility, reconnecting severed ties, democratizing resources, and enabling diversity at other levels. Globalization exhibits vertical disciplining through, for instance, the increasing universal adoption of English as a lingua franca, so that's a gradual flattening of linguistic diversity, a killing off of complexity at one level. And this is precisely why it elicits ambivalent reactions. Some hail the new age of cosmopolitanism and widespread multiculturalism, and others lament the flattening of the local, discrete cultures on which globalization depends. As we toggle our view of globalization at different levels, we may find reasons to alternately abhor and celebrate what we see. The social agent emerges out of a bureaucratization of spirit and becomes an instrument of vertical disciplining, through which the diversity of the individual human being is tempered and disciplined in favor of social complexity. The evolutionary argument suggests that this choice in favor of social over individual complexity is the outcome of evolutionary selection pressures, human memes and genes were more likely to reproduce themselves when social complexity was favored. The holographic human. It turns out then that the human being is overqualified for society. It can perform a much greater variety of character than the social agent, but does not, at least when it enters the social milieu. Like a computer that is only permitted to run one application, or smartphone that is used only to make calls, the gap between capability and use is wide. What sort of thing is a human being if it is different in kind to the social agent, or to any character for that matter? In particular, if it is in some sense to be understood as singular, but also universal, as in a universal character computing machine, a being of potential, not of essence, then how does it act as a part within a whole? What is the relationship between the human being and the social milieu? At this point, we can turn to holons, holography, and the notion of the distributed person as tools designed to rethink part and whole relationships in ways that transcend the traditional binary between individual and communal, by allowing us to think of a given system as a part and a whole at the same time. This work begins perhaps with Arthur Koestler's notion of the holon. For Koestler, biological but also other kinds of holons are, quote, self-regulating open systems which display both the autonomous properties of wholes and the dependent properties of parts. This dichotomy is present on every level of every type of hierarchic organization and is referred to as the Janus phenomenon, end quote. Because Janus is this mythological figure that has two faces. So it's this idea of like having a dual identity as both part and whole. And here's an example that he uses. So an organ in the body, like your liver, for example, can be considered a part of the body, but also an autonomous system in itself, composed of an intricate choreography of sub-assemblies of its own. Koestler applied this notion of holarchy to all manner of systems, from biological to social to galactic. The Janus phenomenon, encapsulating this state of being a part and a whole at the same time, seems to make an appearance in a footnote by Goffman to his discussion on the need to maintain consistent impressions before an audience. When attempting to understand self-presentation at the individual level, one might diagnose the self-deception and insincerity involved in projecting a singular performance as a personal weakness, phrased in clinical language as self-delusion. A better way, ventures Goffman, might be to understand such apparent self-deception as that which results when two different roles, performer and audience, come to be compressed into the same individual. Thus, we can understand the maintenance of character consistency and the suspension of disbelief in the social agent as equivalent to the human being in terms of what results when a person must negotiate their double status as a self-contained autonomous agent on the one hand and part of a larger social milieu on the other. But one could go further than the Janus phenomenon in terms of transcending the strict split between part and whole or individual and communal, using the related notion of holography as a model. In a conventional digital image such as a JPEG file, zooming in, one finds that each pixel corresponds to a discrete part of the image as a whole, a bit of skin or a bit of hair. A holographic image is different, however, in that each pixel of the image or each part of the image pictures the whole, albeit a little blurred. Alfred Gell noticed this unique property of holograms and used it to configure the relationship between a single artwork, part, and the over to which it belongs, whole. He uses the hologram model to explain that although we cannot simultaneously see a whole artist's over, we are given a blurry glimpse of it whenever we look at any single work within that over. More generally, an all-encompassing network can only ever be seen through a node within it. And now I'm going to introduce another really great concept from my father, the concept of the bulk and the conspicuous. So those are, again, his terms. This is getting into the territory even more of thinking about how a complex system can relate to its parts and vice versa. So more generally, an all-encompassing network can only ever be seen through a node within it. Miloš Ranković calls this unseeable in its totality network the bulk, and its nodes the conspicuous, thus likening their ratio and codependence to the conspicuous tip of an iceberg and its invisible submarine bulk. So I quote Ranković here, "We used to think deterministic systems are well behaved only to learn that our predictive confidence about weather, history, psyche is riding on crests of regularity, barely skimming the ocean of chaotic maths. We thought genes govern development, only to find that stretches of DNA are no more than relative bottlenecks in irreducible cycles of developmental contingencies. We thought meaning is in the order of a code, but neglected the meaning of code. We overestimated the genius, never asking who put the genie into the bottle. We overestimated the boss by overlooking the strings. Eyeballing the eye, we mistook a creation of a bulk for a conspicuous mark of the creator." Perhaps this is what we are learning, that the conspicuous is just a face of the bulk, one among the untold multitude in the unfathomably multitasking economy of the hard-working now. The bulk's interface with itself, with the future, conspicuously facing up to itself, beating the beats of the iterating currents of being. And the use of face here is intentional. A bulk is so huge, so massive, like the bottom of an iceberg, that it cannot see itself in its totality. And the only way it can relate to itself, the only way it can interface with itself, is through its conspicuous parts. So for Ranković, the conspicuous is the site at which the bulk reckons with itself, materializing where the God has stopped, which is a quote from Alfred Gell. It is not only that the conspicuous, being diminutive to the bulk and a consequence of it, cannot see the bulk in its entirety save for its own partial blurry view, but the bulk too has an epistemic horizon. It has a limit to what it can know. So totally immersed in the painstaking production of the hard-working now, even the bulk cannot see itself in its entirety. It is all face. In fact, the only way that the bulk can see itself, the only way it can be in touch with itself, is through the conspicuous. This is related to the notion of situated knowledges, in which the varied research produced by individuals and influenced by their partial perspectives becomes the conspicuous and the only way by which the bulk can know itself. Following the computational view of character and the human being, there seems to be a holographic relationship between the human being and the social milieu. In this case, the social milieu churns in and out of itself all the human characters that have ever come into expression. In turn, these characters replay themselves again and again in individual human beings. The human being, like a pixel or part in a hologram, contains a blurry picture of the whole social milieu. It is a part of the whole, but it simultaneously contains the whole. The human being is the conspicuous face or interface of the bulk that is the social milieu. Thus, the human being enables the social milieu to have a relationship with itself. This is how the human being becomes a medium for character, an idea that was intuited in studies of spiritual mediums, as suggested in this passage from Frederick Myers, the 19th century co-founder of the Society for Psychical Research. And I quote, "Each of us is in reality an abiding psychical entity far more extensive than he knows, an individuality which can never express itself completely through any corporeal manifestation. The self manifests itself through the organism, but there is always some part of the self unmanifested, and always, as it seems, some power of organic expression in abeyance or reserve." Once again, we are reminded of Clarissa Dalloway and the way she feels herself to be, not here, 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 but everywhere. As a human being, Mrs. Dalloway contains within herself a blurry image of all human character. That is why she is, seen from a certain perspective, everywhere. In that woman in the street, in that man behind the counter, and even in trees or barns. On the other hand, as a social agent, as the Clarissa Dalloway that is to give a party that evening, she suddenly becomes committed to a part, a role, which forsakes the blurry vastness of the human being in favor of coming into sharp definition as a character, a distinctive mark, setting itself apart from the noise of all marks that is the human being. Perhaps one can never be a human being, but only ever a character amongst possible characters. Perhaps to be is precisely to step into character. OpenAI's text-to-image generator DALL-E 2 potentially provides a practical way of observing this holographic relationship between character and character-running machines. This is because DALL-E itself is a character-running machine. Trained on human visual cultures, it was designed to internalize many different artistic styles, some of them attributable to well-known artists. With DALL-E, it is possible to enter a prompt like "a futuristic cityscape painted by Van Gogh" and get an original image that is nevertheless convincing in its adoption of the character of Van Gogh's painting style. Being able to end prompts with the suffix "in the style of X" and get a coherent result means that DALL-E has internalized multiple artistic characters. DALL-E itself is comparatively characterless. In an ideal sense, it is a universal character-playing machine, its range of possible expression limited by the extent of the data upon which it is trained. DALL-E and other AI systems designed to return expressive outputs such as GPT-3, which can write articles in the voice of different authors, potentially provide a way of experimentally exploring the computational model of self I have used here, in which a human being features as a universal character-playing machine also. Despite the human being's broad character range, the social milieu demands that we attenuate all of the potential of the human being into one set of characters, the social agent, in order to train our character consistency and make of ourselves predictable interfaces. The human being continues to be overqualified for society. But is the continued adoption of a social agent a necessary flattening of the human being?